Good evening. Anchorpete here. I'm with my wife, Shari T. And we just saw the movie The Night House. The Night House is a psychological thriller that just came out, and it stars Rebecca Hall. So first off, we are going to give you our review, but we're going to make sure to not fill it with spoilers. And then if you've already seen it, we're going to get into the spoiler portion in a couple of minutes. So Shari, without going into the spoilers, did you enjoy this movie?
Yes, I thought it was an effective horror movie. It scared me several times, like a lot.
Okay. And you know what? I could actually say the same thing. I was going to ask you the question, is it a scary movie? You're saying it was.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty scary and, suspenseful, and there's a lot of mood, like a lot of atmosphere that made you feel dread, right? And I thought Rebecca Hall was terrific.
She sure was. She pretty much carries this movie on her back. And when we go into spoilers, I'm going to talk about why her performance was so effective in getting me on board with this character. And then also for making me kind of feel the dread for this character towards the end, too. Just before we get into spoilers, I just wanted to go into who made this movie. It's written by two guys, Ben Collins and Luke Piotrowski. And these guys, they've written a couple of horror-related things. They wrote a movie called Siren, which looks like it was about kind of like a siren mermaid creature woman, right?
Oh, interesting.
Right? Another movie called Super Dark Times. And they're working on A Head Full of Ghosts, which is an adaptation of a Paul Tremblay book, which is supposed to be fantastic. I want to get my hands on that book. But besides that, they are also writing the reboot of Hellraiser. So these guys have some horror chops. And the person that's directing this Hellraiser reboot is the guy that directed this movie. His name is David Bruckner.
Oh, so they're going to work together again.
They're going to work together again. David Bruckner, he has directed a part of this anthology movie called VHS. He did this movie called The Signal, which I saw, and it was like a movie that had 3 different directors. And if he did the beginning of that, it was a really, really scary portion of that movie. I didn't like the whole movie, but I think he did the beginning. That's really good.
Okay.
Yeah. And he also did 2 episodes of the Creepshow show that's on Shudder.
Which ones?
Not the ones that we've seen yet. Shari and I just started watching it, but it wasn't any of the ones that we've seen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it any of the ones recommended to us by Danny?
I'm not sure. I'd have to compare my notes.
Danny, if you watch this, let us know if David Bruckner directed any of the episodes you liked.
Danny would definitely know that, yeah.
Yeah, we're watching episodes based on Danny's taste.
Yeah. Well,
which has been good so far.
Heck yeah. So now we can tell Danny what we thought about this movie. Let's go jump into spoilers. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. So spoiler-wise, I just want to point out one thing. I thought we could talk about this right off the bat. Okay? You said the movie's scary. This movie has a very abrupt moment in it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay.
Why don't you say what you're talking about?
Okay. There's this part where Rebecca Hall, who plays this character Beth, she is laying on the lap. Her head is in the lap of her friend Claire, who's played by Sarah Goldberg. And she's kind of talking to her. She's drunk. And Sarah is just kind of, Claire's kind of just trying to make her feel better. And then there's just this jarring, loud noise.
Yeah, that was jarring. Yes.
And there's a sequence that follows it that's just kind of disturbing and scary. And I was like, oh man, if the movie's like this from now on, I'm kind of freaked out.
Which is the sequence that follows that?
So after that moment, and we're going to explain what the hell all this means too in a second.
Well, I'm hoping anyone who's watching this has seen the movie.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to spoil it for you. So make sure you watch it. So hopefully they can just follow along with what we're talking about as if they've seen the movie. I can't remember what happens after that moment, but it did scare the crap out of me. And by the way, this movie uses sound really effectively to scare you. A lot of jarring sounds. They kind of are the jump scares for most of this movie. I think it's just the loud sound scares the crap out of you.
Right. Well, that's actually, you just brought up something I definitely want to talk about too. But just to answer your question, what happens in that sequence? She wakes up, and that's the first time you kind of see that there's a red moon too, right? And then she goes out of her house, and she sees these girls run past her.
Oh, yeah.
And when they run past her, it's this sort of jump scare moment too, and they just jump over a railing. So that is that kind of effective use of sound. The thing is, right, is that
they jump off a cliff. I just want to be clear. It's distressing.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned jump scares, right? And the use of sound. And we talk about that a lot on the Lastercast channel, but just in general, you and I talk about this, and Pepper talks about it with us off screen too. Like, jump scares sometimes are lazy, right? And they just have like a big, loud, jarring noise that goes to make you feel upset, right?
See, I think a jump scare is more like something jumping out at you.
Of course. Of course.
Like, this wasn't something jumping out at you. It was the loud sounds, though.
That sequence was absolutely that sound. It was just like loud noise shaking, and it was like waking up to chaos, you know?
Yeah.
There was one time when a refinery exploded on Staten Island, and it shook me and knocked me out of my bed. And it kind of reminded me of that sequence that just happened, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. With this, right, the whole idea of this movie is that Rebecca Hall, Beth, is trying to figure out, was there more to her husband than she knew? And she's getting all these little clues throughout. Did you find the resolution to be, like, were you happy with what it ended up being?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I think this is basically a ghost story.
Yeah.
Right? There's an important question of who is the ghost. You know, it's not necessarily her husband, right?
Right.
I determined that it was not her husband. But it's a ghost story, and I don't expect ghost stories to totally make sense and all come together, and I don't think this movie did. There are like little plot details that don't add up.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So that kind of bothered me. I have questions. This didn't make sense, but I'm kind of trying to let that go because a lot of ghost stories don't make sense. I mean, they're based on supernatural beings and creatures, so it's hard to always explain it. Yeah. So I'm kind of trying to be okay with that because it was really good and effective in other ways. Okay. What do you think?
Well, the good and effective for me was Rebecca Hall's performance. I mentioned that at the beginning of the show, right? Where she plays a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And as an educator, I felt like I could kind of relate to her. I thought that the scenarios they had of her, like showing that she was a teacher, were like realistic. The way that she talked to her peers, she walks into a staff meeting. The staff meeting seemed pretty genuine, right? And she seemed like the kind of person that she's a teacher, but then she's got this personal life outside too. That had me on board, you know? And
how about the scene with the mom coming in and confronting her about the grades?
Okay. That
was one of my favorite scenes. It was so, yeah. I was like, I kind of wanted to be like, you go girl, but it was also like very terrible for her.
Yeah. I enjoyed that scene. You know, when you're watching a horror movie, you kind of know certain ways that each scene is going to go, right? And I felt like the mom came in. I did not know what this movie was about. I thought that the scene could be one of two ways. Right?
You didn't see the trailer? You didn't know it was about her dead husband?
I did know it was about her dead husband, but I just, obviously they're like uncovering the mystery of his death, okay. Right? He could have been in charge of a cult. That woman could have been having an affair with him. Like, the mom could have been nothing, or
right. The trailer doesn't tell you exactly.
Right.
But you do know that basic premise.
Of course I did, yeah. But I just didn't know this woman that's come to talk to her, is it just like a throwaway scene, or is it like a scene where the woman has some sort of sinister motive or something?
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
And so I felt like the movie, with horror movies, it's like there's like real cliche scenes, and there's the easy way to do things, and then there's the sort of more like director-driven kind of real clever, interesting, creepy horror movies. And I felt like this was somewhere like in the middle, you know? And so with that scene, she does tell this mother off, and she says like, oh, my husband shot himself in the head. But in a lesser horror movie, it could have just cut right to that, and she could have just like played it up.
It could have cut to right to what?
To her being like, well, my husband shot himself, right? But instead, she like kind of tries to be amicable at first, you know? So
Well, you brought this whole thing up because of you liked her teacher scenes, and I thought that was the standout teacher scene. Sorry, like to me that was really her being a teacher, having to deal with the parents, and like how she didn't want to have to deal with the parents, she couldn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it was like an example of like how much she's grieving and how it's affected her. It's also a chance for her to say what had happened to her husband, which I don't think the movie had revealed yet.
Right. Well, that's a really good point too. It's like, the exposition. You kind of assume that he had shot himself at that point because there's a gunshot noise in the very beginning of the movie. But yeah, that was a good way to like get that exposition out of the way, so we know how he killed himself. Yeah, and then there's scenes where parents are kind of pushy like that, where they're like, hey.
That's why I enjoyed it. I mean, like it was exposition, but I love the way they went about it. Like if you're going to explain that her husband killed himself and she doesn't know why, and he did it on a boat, which all those details are included. I love that they did it by her telling off this mom who's giving her a hard time about her son's C.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole thing. Like I said, it's kind of in that in-between space where it's like there's the kind of cliche, lazy, you kind of can predict everything horror movie, and then there's the sort of weird, like director's vision kind of horror movie. And I feel like this is just like right in the middle there. And like her character in general is pretty abrasive because her husband just died. And I think that in a lesser movie, she'd be even more like obnoxious and she'd be even more dramatic. But she doesn't really get dramatic until she's learned more and more about her husband. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, she gets dramatic like for good reason.
Right, exactly, for good reason. Like in a lesser movie, she just would be dramatic right off the bat. Like she's drinking in the beginning of this, but it's not like over the top where she's drinking. It's just that you can tell that she's starting to drink because of the death of her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The one thing I kind of had some problem with that I felt like made it more like a cliche horror movie was I think that she got to a point where, come on, you're staying by yourself in this house. Like, you should go stay somewhere else at this point.
Well, and like in the pivotal night, the final night, she was going to leave. But all this stuff went down that night, so she didn't get around to it. I didn't have a problem with her staying in the house because her husband had built it. It had been their house. You find out they had this like love story that meant everything to her.
Yeah.
And they'd been together for 15 years. And ultimately the movie is about kind of their love story is the driving force behind everything.
Yeah.
It is the catalyst, the reason the husband does things that he does.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's pretty important, and that the fact that she doesn't want to leave the house that he built with her. I don't know. I understood that. Plus, after she starts to uncover little secrets that he had, I understand her wanting to stick around to find out what's going on. I myself, if I found out all this stuff after you died, I would totally be digging up the dirt. I would not be letting it go. I would be doing the same thing.
Yeah. Well, don't you find it interesting?
And I think maybe like the fact that she thinks maybe he's a ghost coming back to see her is a reason for her to want to stay. She's partly scared, but she partly wants to she wants to be held by her husband again. She misses him desperately.
Yeah. Well, that is kind of the beauty of the movie, right? Is it kind of goes back and forth between like what you just said, where she's like longing to see her husband. There's this really touching scene at the very end where she just starts breaking down and crying because she misses him so much. But you think that maybe when she starts breaking down and crying, she's crying because she's like, this is such a crazy scenario. My husband was potentially a killer. But it's like it's not like this black and white thing. It's kind of intermeshed. She misses her husband, but there's the potential that he is this like murderous guy or this guy with like dark secrets.
I thought she was crying because of grief.
Right, exactly. And that leads up to this one other aspect of her performance that was real important to me is that part when she says that she wants to be held by him and she's kind of contorting her body, and they had some kind of effect where they made her skin look like
someone was pressing, actually touching her. Yeah.
That's like incredible acting. It's very possible they did that like digitally, and it was like a person literally was touching her, and they just removed that person.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's what happened. I think that they filmed Rebecca Hall just like pretending like a person was there. And I think that level of acting, that's very impressive to me. That kind of physical contortion. Does it not do anything for you?
I guess I didn't think about it, but I am on board with being a fan of Rebecca Hall.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, before this video, I wanted to like make like a video about Rebecca Hall and why I like her so much.
Oh, okay.
Just something short. 3 minutes. I wouldn't have killed anyone, but like, I'm a big fan of hers. I have been for a while.
Yeah, well, that scene that I'm talking about, I thought she took it to a whole nother level because eventually her body is so contorted that she kind of resembles this like voodoo doll that they show multiple times in the movie.
I'm sure, I know that's on purpose, right?
Right, of course. And so like they do this super close up of her eyes, and it's just her eyeballs essentially, but it's like it's so effective. I don't know, like the.
See, I like that's not the scene that got to me. That's cool if it got to you.
What's the scene that got to you?
I think it is like supposed to be a an important scene.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what was going on in that scene. Like she just tormented and twisted, and they showed it literally through her body.
I think so. We can kind of break it down if you want, or do you want to talk about the scene that really got to you?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there was any one scene that really got to me. It was just the whole atmosphere, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
And like the thing you talked about, that was the scariest part, I thought, is when she woke up to that horrible sound. And then one of the girls running past her really scared me.
Right. Yeah, you jumped. You went like this.
Yeah, it scared the crap out of me. Yeah. So like, but I am going to complain a little. There was a little bit too much of following her around while she's upset.
Okay.
It reminded me a little of Lisi's story, which we recently reviewed. Like, how much am I going to watch a grieving wife just be sad about her husband?
Right.
So there's a little, I would have edited and like maybe had a little bit more action kind of going on. But in the movie's almost all her, right?
Agree.
Just discovering things. I personally like the elements of turning her into an investigator where she has to try to figure out what's going on with her husband.
Yes.
When she starts digging into she finds a few creepy books. She finds the voodoo doll. She finds an actual replica house.
Yes.
Across the woods,
yes.
which would have blown my mind.
Yes,
That's when she starts going into all that and trying to figure out more about her husband's past. I loved all that.
Yes.
It reminded me of The Ring, which I also consider an investigative horror movie.
Right.
It's not known for that, but the whole first half of The Ring is Naomi Watts like trying to like uncover the mystery of the ring, right? And I love all that. I think it just makes it a better movie. And when it gets to the horror aspect and The Ring, it's really great, right? The Ring's known for that scary little girl, but this movie doesn't have that kind of like awesome, scary follow-up to the investigation.
Yes,
I find the follow-up to be a little bit disappointing.
Okay, well, that's interesting that you say that, right? Because the conclusion of her investigation, when all the secrets are revealed, it's not a scary thing like Samara coming out of the TV.
No.
It's not. So in terms of horror, it is maybe not satisfying, right? But I think in terms of like a character-driven story or like a character piece, I feel like it's very satisfying. Because the thing about this movie that's super interesting is that, and if you guys have watched this, but essentially she admits that she died at one point, right? For 4 minutes. And so you find out that this creature that like her husband was essentially trying to protect her from is maybe like the embodiment of death. When I was doing some research,
it's like the devil or the Grim Reaper or something. I mean, if you want to get into like old-fashioned terms,
right? And but that's the thing that's real interesting is that it's not like, oh, this is a demon. It's referred to as like nothing. And when she talks to her friend about her death experience, she says there's nothing there. And in the husband's suicide note, he writes, "There is nothing. Nothing is after you. You're safe now." And I just really liked it. It was like this very nihilistic take on like a demon or a spirit.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, this is the oblivion. This is nothing.
Yeah. Or madness, or just suicide, I mean, all of it could be, the monster that is haunting you. They kind of they put a face to it and said it is like the Grim Reaper or something, but it could just be, what makes people kill other people or what makes people kill themselves, what's the fear behind it?
Right. Like, don't you think that this movie...
It was existential.
Yeah. Like, don't you think this movie could almost be played up as in everything that she discovered was essentially just in her mind and that she was just losing her mind because her husband killed himself?
Yes.
And she couldn't explain it.
Yes.
Right?
Or, I mean, they go so far as to say that the husband is a serial killer.
Correct.
Right? The husband is a serial killer, but he's doing it because he's trying to keep the devil from making him kill his own wife.
Right.
I'm calling the devil the Grim Reaper guy or whatever.
Right.
But So rather than kill his wife, he just brings he kills other women
that look like her
to satisfy this guy.
Right.
But you could say the husband's just a serial killer, and
Right.
like he's hearing voices in his head, you
Right.
know?
Right.
Yeah, so that's interesting. It's interesting to try to explain what could just be a serial killer.
Right, exactly. It's open to interpretation, because when she does find these bodies in that other house, she calls up her friend, and she's like, I don't know if this is real or not. So one way you can take it is like, it's just all in her head. And she goes to go kill herself, and her friend is able to save her at the very end of the movie. But it's never like the friend finds the bodies. But the friend does see the weird voodoo doll, right?
Yeah, the voodoo doll exists. And the caretaker guy has seen the house.
He has seen the other house. That's true. That is true.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Yeah. One thing I will say about this is it kind of, her contorting and stuff, especially at the very end, reminded me of Jennifer Carpenter. And that's her name, right? She's in, what the hell is that movie that Scott Derrickson did that I freaking love? The Exorcism of Emily Rose. That has some really amazing, like, she does this crazy contortionist stuff in that, right? But then besides that, this movie gave me a little bit of a feeling of like Final Destination, right? Because it's like you cheat death and then death comes after you.
That's right. That's definitely what's going on here.
Right.
I thought of Final Destination as well. It also reminded me a little bit of Hereditary, where you're kind of, there's this one central woman.
Mm-hmm.
Her performance reminded me kind of Toni Collette's,
yeah,
like
sure,
where
sure.
she has to like, you know, and also The Ring, the Hereditary, they all have like a central woman trying to like kind of uncover this like mystery that's unraveling that they didn't know about, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of reminded me of that. I think the house, the setting,
Yeah,
on a lake in this kind of like secluded house reminded me of Hereditary.
Oh yes. You know what it also reminded me of though? The house on the lake. It also reminded me of like Black Bear. I was like, is that the same house?
Yeah,
I was like, is that the same house from Black Bear?
Which Black Bear's an interesting movie. Like, that's a side note,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's not a horror film, but it has horror elements.
A little
I'm
bit,
telling
yeah,
you, like
yeah.
there are like parts that are kind of there.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I did think of that too.
Yeah. I was going to ask you. There's one aspect of this movie. I want to know what you felt about it. So one thing that I thought was kind of unique to this movie is that there were scenes where Rebecca Hall would be looking down a hallway, and the shape of like her furniture, or like the, I don't know what the fuck you call it, like just the way that the walls and stuff are shaped, and like the pillars in her house, it would look like the side profile of a silhouette.
Yeah, negative space would
Right?
look like
And then it would like turn and look at her.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened like 4 times in the movie.
Yeah, it's creepy.
You thought that was creepy?
Yeah, you thought, what'd you think?
I kind of thought that, I was like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Is that just like she's losing her mind?
That's the ghost haunting her. It's death.
Yeah, I understand it, but it's like, is the fucking house changing its shape, or is it just a ghost and it like distorted the image?
So you want like these like concrete answers, and I don't think this is the kind of movie that's going to give you that. You have to like accept that not everything's explainable.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that maybe if they had done that once, it would have been good. I don't know. I felt like doing it. They did it like 4 times.
I thought it was just them like trying to, you know, they're stressing that she's being haunted. She is being haunted. It just wasn't by her husband, like she thought. And that's revealed at the end of the movie, where she has this conversation with the Grim Reaper guy who's like, he's gone, you know? Yeah. You've been trying to talk to him and stuff, but it's been me all along.
Yeah. Well,
and some of the unsettling things that the death ghost guy does is that he turns the music on at random times. I found that creepy. Like, that would bother the shit out of me. And he texts her, like, come down, don't be afraid. I thought all that was creepy.
Yeah, and it's the same song every time, right?
Probably meant something to them.
Right. Maybe like their wedding song or something, right? Or like the husband's favorite song. You make me think of this one point too, which was, you never hear the husband, the actual true husband, speak in the whole movie. They show a video of him working on the house. He doesn't talk. He just kind of waves at her and stuff. Every time, like, the actor speaks, it's that creature. It's not him.
Yeah.
He's completely, like, there's no voicemails from him. There's no video of him talking. So I thought that was very interesting that you never hear his voice. So it's like accentuating his absence. right?
Yeah.
And then this creature is filling the absence. Death is filling the absence. So the movie, it's extremely metaphorical. It's about the idea of loss, grief maybe driving you nuts. It's the idea of, oh, well, there's nothing after death. How do I deal with it? At first, she seems to be okay with the idea that there's nothing after death. But then after her husband dies, she changes her tune, right? So I think that's interesting stuff. That's stuff I actually think about all the time.
I don't know that she changes her tune naturally. She changed her tune because something starts to haunt her.
Something starts to haunt her. Yeah, yeah. Right. But if we went with the idea that, like, there is no spirit or anything like that, it's all in her head, then, you know, it's just showing a person kind of breaking down because they can't handle it, right? Mm-hmm. The loss. Yeah.
I have like questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the movie's called The Night House.
Yes.
I guess we're talking about the house across the lake.
Yes.
That is kind of a replica. It's not a replica because it's not completed.
Yeah.
It's like a started house with the same floor plan.
Yes.
Where bodies are buried. Where he takes women and kills them, I guess. And the husband, like, pretty horrible secrets that she has to find out about her husband, by the way. I'd be like mortified. But I didn't understand why she kept having visions of that house.
Well, there is one other thing, right? So like I've been watching.
I understand the suicide note.
Okay. Well, here, can I maybe throw my speculation?
Yes.
So I've been watching movies like Insidious and The Conjuring, and there's possession in that, right? And in those movies, the idea is that, like, the person is gone from their body, and so another thing is filling the void, right? And that creature says to her that when she died, he's always been with her, right? And so you could say that, like, maybe he is kind of like in Rebecca Hall or always there, right? And so they do talk about, like, using mazes and stuff to trap a creature, right?
Oh, yeah. That's another thing I didn't understand. There's all this stuff about witchcraft and these books he was using and the voodoo doll.
Yeah.
I don't know how all that played in. That is not clear to me. Someone dedicated a book to him, like, saying, use this well. And it's that creepy book with all the blueprints of the house. See, I thought this was going to be more about, like, this creepy house and like, this creepy mirror house.
Right.
And what was in it. And it was kind of, but they really didn't explain why why the husband built this other house.
Yeah.
Was it just part of fooling death?
Yes, I truly do think that was what it was, to, like, make it like a mirror to where, like, its attention would be drawn over there. And I wrote down the name of that book when we were at the Alamo Draft House, but then I left the paper at the Alamo Draft House.
Some crazy word with lots of vowels.
Yeah, like car, Scotia.
Whenever you have like 4 vowels in a row, it's a creepy word.
Yeah, it was a cool name. I wonder if it's like a legitimate word.
I know.
But I mean, I don't necessarily have all the answers too, unfortunately. But
didn't you want there to be more with, like, the bookstore? This bookstore is selling, like, witchcraft books that are really rare and stuff, and I wanted her to go to the bookstore and find out more than just a girl who, like, almost had an affair with the husband, you know? I wanted there to be more there. I wanted, like, more to be there with the house. So I was just kind of disappointed in how those things turned out.
Yeah, and that in itself is kind of weird too, right? Because he went to go choke that girl, right? Just kill girls, just like he always...
Thinking about killing her, yeah.
And I guess in that moment... Maybe he had an attachment to her, and that's why he was like, I'm going to go kill myself instead of kill yet another woman to keep my wife safe. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I mean, I don't know. The explanation for the husband is a little murky too, right? So he's killing all these women to protect his wife, yet he ends up killing himself and not protecting her at all, in fact exposing her. I guess he just couldn't do it anymore.
Right. So, I mean, there's holes. Clearly, right? That's why I said that it's like in that middle ground between, like, just cheesy, you can expect everything horror, and that sort of that movies like you mentioned, like Hereditary. I would even say The Ring is like that too, where it's like that's the vision of the director, you know. Whereas this, it's like it's somewhere in the middle.
Have you seen What Lies Beneath?
I thought about that movie. I have not, though.
Oh, this was had a lot of
another
that.
thing with the spouse, right? Uncovering the secrets of the spouse.
Right, and like set on a boat town with lakes and things. Yeah, it reminded me of that a lot too.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I didn't.
It's a ghost story too.
Yeah, is it like Robert Zemeckis or something like that? Yeah.
It's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think this is definitely worthwhile. I recommend this for horror fans, Rebecca Hall fans. You recommend it as well?
Yeah, I think it's scary. I do think it's scary.
Yeah. So we did The Green Knight 2 weeks ago. Now we're covering The Night House. We got more movies coming and hopefully a TV show soon. If you guys have any recommendations, you can also tell us in the comments. Did you have anything else you want to say about The Night House?
Nope.
You're good? Okay. All right. So we are going to our reverse house and I don't know. All right. Well, we'll see you guys soon.